I'm really excited about this next panel featuring journalists who cover disability issues, journalists with disabilities, and journalists with disabilities who cover disability issues. Please welcome Victoria Arlen from ESPN, Tim Gray from Variety, Kristen Lopez from IndieWire, and Dino-Ray Ramos from Deadline Hollywood. I'm going to start with Tim. You've been at Variety for more than 30 years and have had a really distinguished journalism career. Why, in your opinion, are people with disabilities not covered in the entertainment media in the same way that other marginalized populations are?
I think people with disabilities are considered the invisible minority. I don't think journalists are putting up a wall. I think it just doesn't occur to them. And even now, with all the talk about diversity and inclusion, 90% of that conversation is about racial inclusion, and maybe the other 10% is about gender with women equality. But I think Asians are not part of it, and people with disabilities are off the radar. And it's also interesting because Variety started in 1905, so I've been going through the archives, and there were protests by the NAACP starting in like 1915, and they've been protesting ever since then. But people with disabilities didn't start protesting until the last few years. So I think it's a cumulative effect, and I think people are much more aware. I think journalists are much more aware than they were even 4 years ago. But obviously, still a long way to go.
Thank you. Dino, you also identify as an ally to the disability community. And like Tim, you've been very intentional about covering disability-related topics. Why is that important to you?
I think with me, it's, I identify as queer. I am also Asian American. I'm Filipino. And so I have been an advocate for diversity and inclusion in Hollywood. Like, since I even started my journalism career, I was doing it before I even thought I was doing it, if that makes any sense, because I gravitated towards people in the margins because growing up, I didn't see people like me. And so, I just really, when it comes to people with disabilities, it's like, it's what Tim was saying is like, it's a blind spot, and so, I just really started doing more coverage on people with disabilities, and even in Hollywood and film and television, probably just about a little bit under or over a year ago. And I am still a little bit, learning. And so, I don't know everything about disabilities, and I want to be a good advocate. And I think that's important. I go into diversity and inclusion coverage with the mentality of if one of us wins, we all win. So that's why, and I think that people with disabilities are in the margins, and they have been, disserviced this whole for the longest time. And I'm going to try to advocate for them as much as I can and use my platform for that, just as I do with the Asian American community, just as I do with the queer community, with the Black community, Latinx, Indigenous, anyone who is in the margin or who has been othered.
Thank you. I love what you said. If one of us wins, we all win. I think that really resonates with everyone. Kristen, while your official title is TV editor, you unofficially kind of have the diversity beat at IndieWire as well. Why is it important to have disabled voices covering disability in the media?
Well, I mean, outside of the obvious elements of knowing the verbiage, and it's far easier, I think, for an able-bodied writer to kind of stick their foot in their mouth unintentionally in reporting on disabled issues, as it is for any minority issue, if you don't really know the correct terms and really what you're looking for in terms of criticism. So in that regard, it benefits to have disabled voices. But I think more importantly, in the work that I've been doing, there are disabled narratives and a lot more things that the average writer I don't necessarily think sees. So whether that's something like the Babysitter's Club TV series that just came out and that disabled storyline, or even, in film, looking at the history of film and how things are coded, and whether that is with regards to race or sexuality or disability, you can see something that an able-bodied person, cis white male, might not see. So the more different experiences and perspectives that come through in the writers will allow for more diverse perspectives to come through in the media that is being consumed.
On that note, it's also important that disabled journalists be given the opportunity to cover non-disability related topics as well. So Kristen, you're on this panel because you're an awesome reporter, not just because you have a disability. You know, so do you ever feel pigeonholed?
Sometimes, yeah. I have great coworkers, but if there's anything with a tangential connection to disability, I'll get it forwarded, or somebody will ask me my opinion about, what do you think of this movie or this TV show, or what do you think of this organization? And I love that they're soliciting my opinion, but it also feels like I kind of end up filling that hole that they don't really know about, that you become kind of the person that takes on all the types of minority issues. And so I've really had to kind of advocate, and thankfully, my coworkers are really great about letting me, they know things other about me than my disability. So, if it's like, if it's a classic film related topic, they're like, just give it to Kristen, she'll understand. Or if it's something else, they know what to send me. But there definitely comes, a point where I do get asked to cover stuff that, whether it's LGBTQ or Black storylines, and I have to kind of be like, well, I'm not of those groups, so I don't necessarily know if I should be covering them. And that's the problem that comes with being a diversity and inclusion writer, is that you end up having to carry the weight of all the minority writing that happens on the site. So you really have to, just for your own mental health, kind of be like, hey, I need to cover other things because there's more to me than just being a minority.
Dino, I see you nodding there. Did you want to add something?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I'm in the same boat as Kristen. It's like, and I think that just kind of speaks to the importance of diversity in a newsroom. One of my friends called it the Highlander syndrome. There could only be one, but that's not true. I think the more diverse voices I think we have in a newsroom, and I think this applies to any workplace, the more points of view we see, and it lifts the burden, and it's also not the onus on diverse voices to carry, like Kristen said, the burden, not this like responsibility of talking for every single diverse group, because we're only one person, and we only could do so much, and we don't know everything about every single, and that's why with disabilities, with the people with disabilities and that coverage, I do my best to learn and write what I know, but I don't know everything because that's not my point of view. And that's why we need more of those voices in the room. And I was just listening to the previous panel with Rami and all of them, and what they were saying about the importance of just like having these different voices on set, and and it just applies to everything. People just need to open their mind and be nice. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I'd like to shift topics a moment. Victoria, while you no longer need mobility aids, when you started your job as a reporter at ESPN, you were using a wheelchair. Were there any hurdles to finding employment with a visible disability?
I was very fortunate, and when ESPN brought me on as a reporter, there wasn't a huge issue when it came to me having a wheelchair, me needing a few extra assistive devices when it came to reporting and hosting. I think the biggest hurdle was how can I do my job in the most productive way where my disability isn't the topic of conversation. And so oftentimes when I was doing interviews initially or hosting, I was sitting at a desk or sitting in a captain's chair, and really kind of wanted it to be about who I was interviewing and their story, and not having mine be the topic of, oh, that reporter is sitting in a wheelchair. As great as that is, and as great as that was such a really cool thing, it was also when it came time to do my job, I really spoke very much up about the fact that I wanted this to be about who I'm reporting and who I'm talking about and their story, and not the fact that the reporter there is in a wheelchair. And so I think that it was finding that fine line, because I had a very colorful wheelchair and I was very proud of my wheelchair, but I also had a job to do. And as a journalist and as a reporter, I wanted to make my job and the subject of who I was interviewing the star of the show, and not have, you know, my hot pink wheelchair be the one kind of stealing that away, or my hot pink crutches. So I think those were the biggest hurdles, but ESPN, and has been, even on all my different stages of learning to walk and stuff, has been so supportive, and just getting creative with hosting and different things on set, so I could go from A to B. And it was very easy to kind of transition into that, where ramps were installed, but it made everyone think. It made people, you know, my colleagues think about, okay, where's the elevator? Where's the ramp? How can we get you up towards the desk and then move your chair out of the way? So I think it definitely made it for a little extra creativity, but I have been incredibly fortunate that it was a pretty, you know, seamless transition, as far as I was a new journalist, but also I was in a wheelchair, and how do we navigate those waters? And so ESPN really stepped up and allowed me to kind of step into my role without any issues.
And Kristen, you worked as a freelancer for more than a decade prior to landing your job at IndieWire. Did you have any difficulties with requesting accommodations?
You know, you always have difficulties in the sense of feeling like you don't want to make too much out of something. You know, I have always advocated for myself, but once you start getting into the world of media, and I think it was something that was spoken about in the last panel, you know, the kind of fear of being labeled difficult and look like you're asking for too much. You know, I know that when I was hired, I definitely figured I'd have to adapt in some way. You know, thankfully our office is all modern, so there's elevators, it's all flat. You know, it wasn't about having to reconfigure anything. There were elements that they didn't know were going to be troubling, and you know, I definitely was afraid to mention it. And the first time I really needed to ask a question, I was waiting for somebody to be like, "Oh God, here it comes. She's gonna want us to redo the whole damn thing." And I was really, really surprised, and actually told the person that I was working with that I was so happy. I was like, you know, there's no eye rolling, there's no anything. It was just like, what do you need? How can we do that in terms of like rearranging shelves in the break room, which is now irrelevant because nobody's working in the office anymore. You know, I think the biggest thing for me was I wanted an office chair. And I think a lot of people make the assumption that like, Kristen doesn't need an office chair. She has a chair with her. She obviously wants to sit in that for the entire 8 hours of her workday. And I asked for a chair that I could, you know, work at, that was able to go up and down because I'm short. So I needed it to obviously go up to the desk. And there was no hesitation about that. They got me a really cool chair that I kind of wish I'd taken when the office shut down, because it's super cool. But I mean, again, it was like no hesitation. It was, what do you need? Let's do that. I think the hardest challenges for me probably came more when I was freelancing, because you're doing that all on your own. You're your own one woman everything. And going to events in Los Angeles, whether that's a screening room that doesn't have any handicap seating because there's no belief that a disabled person will be in there, or traveling to a film festival in a city that you don't know, you know, you're the only person, you know, you can't go to an editor or a manager and be like, hey, I need this accommodation. You have to be your own advocate. And that's probably where most of my issues have come from, because there is that belief that, you know, you're one person asking for this, so you're a big pain in the ass. But it's been a great experience working for IndieWire, because that all went away.
Mm-hmm.
And then print and online journalism, it can pretty much be done from anywhere. So can you talk to me a little bit about the importance of accommodations with regards to working at home, both before and now with COVID?
Yeah, I think the thing that we're going to see is this continues for however long this continues. You're going to have to start having those conversations with employees. You know, I think that was the joke when I started at IndieWire. You know, I had been asked, would you be able to transition from working in an office after 12 years of working from home? And I said, that's fine. And then I worked in the office for about 3 weeks, and then we all got told to stay home. And the joke that I kind of told my editor was, well, do you think you can do your job effectively working from home after being in the office all this time?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing we're going to end up seeing more of, is that the reason why there's a lot of emphasis on the office in regards to writing is, you know, corporate office space being so expensive and you want that return on investment, but there's also this valid belief that you're not focused enough when you're able to work from home, which is valid. And it's great to be able to go to an office, do your job, and then drop everything there and go home and completely separate. But that's very limiting to a disabled person who wants to work for you. I'm very fortunate that I'm mobile, that I can get from A to B, that I can sit, you know, for 8 hours a day at an office. But I always think about people who aren't that fortunate, who are still writing great things, but they can't work for 8 hours a day because they can't sit, or they're, you know, unable to do office work for a variety of reasons. Are they automatically X'd out of working for a major publication because they can't physically come to a location? We're seeing that that's a fallacy, that you can do that from home. So I think that as this extends and as we see more companies want to hire diversity, there needs to be more discussion about making accommodations for writers. I think regardless of disability, whether that's working mothers, whether that's people, you know, who just can't work in one location. I think there needs to be more discussion about how writing is a medium that is great for choice, and choice in your workspace is one of them.
And as we heard in previous panels, whether it's writing as a journalist or writing for TV, having a disability can really add that extra perspective, or having any sort of marginalized background is just one more experience that you bring to it. And Victoria, you know, you talked last week with me about how having a disability at any point in your life really provides you with a unique perspective of adversity. How has it helped you in all of your news coverage?
I'd say for me, you know, obviously having my story and going through the things that I went through kind of gave me, at least when I was brought on to ESPN, they were kind of like, look, we want your perspective as a young reporter, because I was 20 at the time. But we also, you've seen a lot in 20 years, and we want kind of what you've learned through that to come through your storytelling. And so I think going through the things that I went through gave me, in a sense, an element of telling a story, but connecting on a different level with individuals. And a lot of the work I did in my early days was with Special Olympics and with X Games and with ESPYs and all these different stories, different athletes from all walks of life. And so being able to connect, and you wouldn't believe how many people on the outside seem fine, but have had a journey to get to where they are. And so for me, knowing, you know, the journey that it took for me to get to where I am, being able to kind of go back and ask different athletes and individuals, okay, how did you get from there to here? What was that moment? What was that, you know, that mountain you had to climb? And I think having my own mountain that I had to climb really allowed me to really look for those mountains with other people, but also understand and connect with them and think, well, if this was me, how would I want that story to be told? How would I want that to be told in the most authentic, heartfelt way that could really have an impact for so many people? And so I think finding that fine line was a real fortunate blessing in disguise with everything that I had gone through.
Thank you for that. And I mean, we've talked a bit about covering different types of issues, and I think whether you have a disability or not, and sometimes even when you don't and you start covering disability issues, that can be vitally important. So Tim, you know, you often say that if you don't write about it, who will? And I know that you've thought about it, like as a white male, like ensuring authentic coverage of different marginalized populations is something that is vitally important to you. So how do you go about really shining a spotlight on kind of stories that aren't typically written?
I mean, what I try to do is we have meetings at Variety, and I try and figure out a way that I can bring people with disabilities into this angle, and also to make other people at Variety kind of aware, so we can talk about that, because again, I've been pitched stories by people with disabilities and saying, look, I'm having a really hard time making it in the entertainment industry, and it's like, okay, but that's not really a story, because everybody has a hard time making it in the entertainment industry. So it's like you try and find the angle for that. And so, I mean, I would say to people, if you pitch stories, kind of coordinate with other people, try to come up with a good angle that's kind of a grabber, because I'll just give you a quick example, but I mean, we just ran a story today about the turmoil on the Ellen DeGeneres show. It got 1 million readers. I did, by comparison, I did an Olivia de Havilland memorial that got 100,000 readers. I did an article on people with disabilities working behind the camera. It got 800 readers. So, but a lot of places that they really worry about traffic. I mean, at Variety, they worry about traffic, but I'm kind of exempt from that. So I can write a story about people with disabilities behind the camera, and I don't worry about how many hits it's going to get, because I don't care. It's the right 800 people are going to be reading that. But again, for most other publications, you got to find an angle that's going to grab people. And so I would say, talk to each other. And that's why respectability is so great, because it's like, I think this is a way for people with disabilities to kind of tap into your knowledge. And it's like bounce ideas off of you. Does that make sense? I don't want to put too much responsibility on you.
Well, so the message that I'm receiving from that is, so when any of you or others write a story about disability, it's on all of us to really promote it and get more eyeballs on it, so that way others can write more and be given the go-ahead. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I do think coordinating things with each other is important, and to do it on social media, it's a great opportunity. So yeah, I mean, I talked to one person, this is one person, he said there's a real strong deaf community, there's a real strong blind community, but there's not a really strong disabilities community where everybody talks to everybody else. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that's one of the goals, because the more you talk to each other, the more you can coordinate things, you can make a stronger pitch and enlighten people. And again, sometimes, one phone call to a journalist is going to make a difference, and you might have to be 20 phone calls over a year to just before the idea sinks in. But I think for me, the big goal is to make people more aware of people with disabilities.
Thank you. And this question is for anyone who would like to answer. What advice do you want to give to young folks who want to be journalists? The industry is shrinking for everyone. It's as Tatiana mentioned, I'm a former journalist, and I know there are a lot of former journalists out there. So how, do you suggest this as a career for folks? And then how do people succeed in the journalism industry, and specifically, how do people with disabilities succeed in the journalism industry? Anyone want to?
Don't do it. I'm just joking.
I mean, Dino's kind of right. That's what I've been telling people, and it's very weird. I get a lot of emails from young disabled writers that want to get in this industry. They ask me how I do it, and I always think, like, am I cool enough to dispense this advice? So I mean, it's twofold. You just have the in general element of writing, which is you really, really, really have to be financially able to hustle and struggle, because this is not a money-making industry at the moment, unfortunately. Print is been dying for a long time. The website scene is, as we've seen with COVID, a lot of good writers are now freelance, or sites are closing down. So the pool of writers is getting bigger, but there's not a lot of places for them to go. So for me, I was fortunate that I had a family that was willing to get day jobs and work while I freelanced on the side. And it was enough to keep me going, But if I was living on my own and had to pay for food and utilities and all of that, I would not have been able to sustain myself at all. And it's still up until I got my job at IndieWire, I was still living paycheck to paycheck, with my family helping bear the brunt of what I was doing. So from that spectrum, you know, if you are financially able to struggle, more power to you. Like, we need more of you. But for disabled writers specifically, there's a whole other level of issues. You know, I mentioned festivals. The entertainment industry, festivals are a necessary evil. You have to know what's hot and what's new and what's coming. And so you have to go to these events that are in places that you might not have been to. And it requires a lot of planning, a lot of coordinating, not just on your part, but sometimes coordinating with a festival to let them know that, hey, there's a disabled writer coming, because they have to reconfigure sometimes meeting places or red carpets. I mean, it's a process, and it's hard and it's frustrating, and at times it can be very upsetting. But if you are able to be a really strong advocate for yourself and you're not afraid to have people maybe not like you at the end of those conversations, it's a lot of fun. I don't know at this point, having done this for so long, any other job that I could do that would be as fun and unpredictable and fulfilling as writing has been. But again, I come at it from being a very fortunate set of circumstances. It is hard work, not just to write, but to be a disabled person writing who has to take on this extra level of advocacy. So it's a process.
I mean, for me being in television, I get asked quite a bit, because being at ESPN is a dream for me and for a lot of reporters out there too. I think for me, if that's what you want to do, if that sets your heart on fire and excites you, go for it, but do not be afraid to knock on doors. And that's really what got me in the door, was knocking on doors, mentors, and taking people up when they offered me to job shadow, and being able to kind of put myself out there a little bit in my wheelchair with my disability on display, and being kind of fearless in that sense. Like, yes, I was scared. Yes, it was intimidating, but I knew I wanted to do this, and I knew I wanted to learn, and I was willing to strap a wagon to the back of my wheelchair and deliver coffee as an intern. I mean, I was willing to do whatever it takes. And so I think if you want to do it and really, really are willing to put in the work, go for it. But if you're not wanting to put 110% into it, like Kristen said, then, you know, maybe there's another path. But I think if you want to do something, you have to just go in wholeheartedly regardless, and just kind of not be afraid to just kind of dive on in.
Just, you know, it is interesting in how I came into the journalism industry at a really weird time when print was just starting to die, and everyone was all, what's this online thing? What is a blog, you know? So and then I got my first kind of adult journalism job was at the Oakland Tribune. So I actually worked in print when they used to call news, you know, they used to measure articles in inches. I don't know if they still do that. Do they still do that? And, you know, and then I've just seen, like Victoria was saying, like when I got laid off of Oakland Tribune and I went into the freelance realm, and print was slowly dying, and you have to kind of be your own businessman, be your businesswoman, and knock on doors and start hustling. And with how the media landscape is changing right now, I think the bottom line with journalism is that it's storytelling, right? And it's reporting. And it's like, there's so many different kinds of avenues to do that now. You have Instagram stories, you have, you know, vlogs, you have YouTube, you have, I guess, TikTok. You want to count that? That could be something too. Sure, why not? You know, but there's so many avenues with media. You know, I don't even know, this is going to sound so ignorant. Is there such thing as J school anymore? Do people still go to journalism school? Is there like a department of that, or has it turned into a whole just kind of blanket media? But bottom line is that I think there is opportunity. You just have to hustle, and you have to be willing to get your doors slammed in your face, people saying no, people ignoring you. because it's a competitive industry. And then once you find that spot, stay there.
Well, and to go off what you said in regards to, you know, going to school and stuff like that, I remember, because I was 19 when I started job shadowing, and then 20 when I got, you know, offered a job. And I remember going to the producer and being like, okay, so I'm still in school. Like, should I switch to journalism? Like, what do I do? And my mentor was like, honestly, no. Spend as much time as you are in front, behind, twice the amount behind the scenes. Learn how this industry works, learn how to write, learn how to produce, learn the entire kind of the whole process where you are, and then do your research outside of that too. But really, if you have an opportunity to go into the door or knock on a door and have a door open, even if it's not necessarily a job, don't be afraid to kind of step into that, because you don't know where that will lead you. And don't be afraid of the closed doors, because those build character, but also can lead to better opportunities.
I'm going to have to find a time to bring all of you back for a longer conversation. I feel like we only began to hit at like the top of the surface of this, and you all have really, really interesting perspectives, and people are really enjoying that. You're all being very honest and giving really frank advice. So I want to thank you all so much, Victoria, Tim, Kristen, and Dino, for your time today.